Hi everyone, today I am going to be drawing this rose using colored pencils. I'm using Prismacolor and Polychromos pencils for this project, and then to create the black background I'm going to be using a Prismacolor marker as well as a Derwent drawing ivory black pencil. Here you can see me just going over the outline, getting all of these petals outlined in, and then after that all we have to do is color them in. I'm using a really sharp, nice Polychromos pencil for that. That is the, let me look here, light cadmium red. And now I'm just starting to work through the shadow areas of the rose, and for this I was using a Polychromos Caput Mortem Violet and a Polychromos Dark Red, and then I was also using a couple of the Prismacolor reds, the Crimson Red and the Crimson Lake. And I basically just went around the entire drawing, and anywhere I saw a little bit of shadow I would add one of those colors. For the darkest areas I was using the Caput Mortem Violet, but then in some of the little corner shadows that weren't quite as dark, I was just using the Dark Red or even the Crimson Lake. I did find that I had a little bit of trouble blending out that Caput Mortem Violet in my later layers, and so looking back I would have not made those shadows quite as dark. Those places that you see me adding that in pretty well stained the paper, and those dark colors stayed where they were, and I ended up erasing a little bit later on. So be very careful, very light when you're working with those pencils, unless you want that area to be really dark. Now I'm coming around with my white pencil, and I'm just adding kind of a protective layer on any of the places that I wanted to maintain a bright white highlight. I didn't have a perfect color for the highlights in this rose. They're not really white, but they're a lot lighter than my lightest orange color that I had available. So I just used a combination of the white pencil and went over it with the Prismacolor orange, and that gave me the perfect light highlight color that I wanted. Now you can see me just going over the entire drawing with that Prismacolor orange pencil, and I don't always work this way, but I think it worked really well for this particular drawing. I just got a layer of that on. That was the main mid-tone color that I wanted. And then I just worked through petal by petal and started adding in a little bit more color. I was using several different pencils. I was using quite a bit of Poppy Red and Permanent Red from Prismacolor. I was also using a lot of orange and pale vermilion from Prismacolor, and then I was using the cadmium orange and light cadmium red from Polychromos, as well as a little bit of scarlet red and pale geranium lake. And then if I needed to darken up the shadows at all, I was coming back in with some of that dark red or the crimson red or crimson lake from Prismacolor. That's pretty much it. I tried to keep my pencils fairly minimal here, rather than trying to match my reference image perfectly. I was just looking more at the values. I was trying to pay really close attention to the edges of the petals. I wanted to make sure there was a significant definition between the petals, and you can do that by adding some sharp shadow lines, but then you want to bring that shadow out away from the edge so that it doesn't look like it's just outlined. Helps it look really natural. I'm calling this one an autumn rose because it has those bright orange colors that I see around here in the fall in Indiana. And I'm just continuing to work my way around petal by petal. I always like to start in the shadows and the highlights, and then it makes it really easy to just go over everything with the more mid-tone colors. After I have gone through all of these petals and added plenty of pigment to the paper, I'm going to blend everything out with the solvent. And you'll see me doing that coming up here soon. With some of these center petals, it was just really important to pay attention to the way these lines were flowing and really pay attention to the highlights, where they're placed, and some of the veiny lines that are running up around these petals, making sure that those are going in the right direction just to give shape to those petals. I kind of wanted it to look like they were tumbling out of the center there. And here I've zoomed in just a little bit closer so you can see more detail. Notice how grainy the pencil looks at this point, and that's all going to get dissolved and blended together when I go over everything with solvent. And if you're not using solvent, you can just make sure you're going over with more and more layers of pencil until you get a nice smooth look. I just like my colored pencil drawings to look really painterly. I added a touch of this really bright neon pink and neon orange around the edges. I experimented with this one petal and then I added it to a couple more petals in my second layers just because I thought it'd be fun to have that really bright highlighted look after I add the black background. Really makes this drawing pop. And now you can see me coming over with the solvent, and I'm using Gamsol odorless mineral spirits to blend this, and I have a Royal & Langnickel number 2 filbert brush. Just probably my favorite brush to use when I'm blending with colored pencil. Has a nice it's a soft brush, but it has a really nice firmness to it, so you don't want anything that's going to be floppy because it won't really be able to get in there and dissolve the pigment very well. And you can see the other thing that's happening as I work through and dissolve the pigment and blend this out is that my highlights are really starting to pop out where I added the white pencil underneath the layer of orange. And you can see those shadows are looking pretty messy at this point. When you blend over everything with the solvent, it just dissolves that pigment and creates a nice base for me to come over with my next layers of pencil. So this flower is not even close to being done. I think I spent another close to 3 hours on it after this. And those final details, you don't notice as much difference in the drawing as I'm working through those, but they really do make a big difference in the final drawing. So keep that in mind. If you're using this technique, it might not look perfect. It's just blended. It's ready for the next layers. And here I just flipped this flower upside down. It just makes it easier for me to go around the edges with the brush from this angle. If I weren't recording, I would be turning that page constantly, just making things a little bit easier for my hand. See where those edges, just that Capit Mortem Violet just kind of stayed right there and just cemented itself on that paper. I didn't love that. I ended up using the electric eraser to kind of soften that some. And now I'm just adding my second layers, and you can see I go over each petal, probably spending another 10 minutes or so on each one, making it as perfect as I can. My white pencil showed up really nicely over those layers. I was using a white Prismacolor, but then I came back over in most places and toned that down with the orange. I didn't want really bright white highlights necessarily. I just wanted lighter orange highlights. I drew this one on a paper called Rising Museum Mount Board, and it could be drawn on any of the papers that I know that I like to work with, Strathmore Bristol Smooth or Arches Hot Press Watercolor paper. And if you follow along and use the same process that I use, you're going to get something very similar. You're going to just have a slightly different result. But I would follow these same steps no matter what paper I was working on. Can see those bright neon pink and oranges one more time. It's the first time I've ever used those pencils, and it was kind of fun on this one. Now I'm starting work on the background, and I'm just going around the edge with the black marker. And I was using, this marker has two different tips. It has just a fine point tip that I use to outline everything, and then it has a brush tip that I'm now using to fill in the rest of the paper. And a couple pieces of advice for this. One is make sure you have more than one black marker if you're going to attempt this, because with this much coverage, those markers do start to run out of ink. And now I'm coming back through with a fresh marker and adding one more layer. Just to, you can see how that's really starting to darken that up even further. And then I'm coming over with my Derwent Drawing black pencil, and I did a couple layers with this pencil, and then I dabbed some solvent on. I was really careful not to drag the solvent across the paper. And you can see how that's giving me a really nice black background. If you would like to see in real time how I drew this with some instruction videos, you can go to my Patreon page. I have a 5-part tutorial series that shows exactly how I drew everything. So check that out if you're interested. And otherwise, I will be back next week with another video. Bye, everybody.